Stealth missions emphasize solitude and loneliness. And on a remote island off the coast of Alaska, that isolation should be suffocating. But Metal Gear Solid doesn't allow that to happen. Snake leaves footprints in the snow alone, but in reality, he isn't alone. Not really. Codec calls gave us one of the most famous sound bites in gaming, as well as iconic artworks and characters, all framed in black and green. But the codec gives us much more than that. It becomes a classroom, a confession booth, a command channel, a place for tutorials, jokes, warnings, lies, and the occasional reminder that Snake should really stop smoking.
Where'd he go?
Some calls are famous enough that fans know them line for line. Others can sit undiscovered for years, hidden behind a frequency the player never dialed. And while Metal Gear Solid's main story is a masterpiece, that's not what I want to focus on today, because some of the game's best writing isn't showcased in the cutscenes or mandatory conversations. It's hidden in the optional codec calls. And between a cast of voices, each with their own role to play, Metal Gear Solid starts to smuggle in its themes.
Just a box.
The best example of this is Nastasha Romanenko. On the surface, Nastasha is there because Snake needs a nuclear specialist. Campbell introduces her as a military analyst, an expert on high-tech weapons, and someone who can support him by codec.
I'm just an amateur when it comes to nuclear weapons.
I know. That's why I've requested the assistance of a military analyst named Nastasha Romanenko.
That's her official function anyway, to provide Snake with information on warheads. When Snake asks,
Where's she working from?
Campbell replies Los Angeles. Snake responds,
California. Seems like 1,000,000 miles away.
It's a throwaway line, but it's more important than that. Nastasha isn't battling the snow with Snake or mapping the facility, but she's an important voice many miles away. When Snake is dealing with guards and locked doors, Nastasha is dealing with the reason those doors exist in the first place. But here's where it gets interesting, because you can play the entire game without ever calling Nastasha. It's not only possible to do so, it's quite easy to miss Campbell's mention of Nastasha and her codec frequency, and forget about it entirely. But optional doesn't mean unimportant. When she introduces herself, she comes across as a professional specialist, a useful resource of information. She tells Snake he can ask her about nukes, weapon systems, and the immediate threat. She says she can only provide information from where she is.
Unfortunately, all I can do from here is provide you with information.
Hopefully that'll be enough.
It's a limitation on many counts, but it's also very powerful. She can't tell you how you can survive Shadow Moses, but she can tell you why it exists. A few optional calls later, she explains that the facility was built to temporarily store nuclear warheads, not permanently solve anything or make the danger vanish.
It was made only to temporarily store the nuclear warheads.
She goes on to explain, dismantling a warhead doesn't magically erase what's inside it. You still have nuclear material, you still have storage problems and old weapons becoming new risks.
They cannot do that. You see, when you dismantle a warhead, you still have nuclear materials that must be stored.
That's such a sharp idea to hide in an optional call. Because the main plot tells us about terrorists taking over a nuclear facility. Nastasha says yes, but why is that facility full of nuclear material in the first place? It places a slower, uglier fear underneath the entire setting. It's the idea that the Cold War didn't end neatly. It left behind stockpiles, waste, storage sites, experts, black budgets, and facilities like Shadow Moses. Places built to hold the consequences everyone would rather stop thinking about. You call the codec expecting help. Sometimes you get a hint or a tutorial, and sometimes, almost casually, the game hands you its entire worldview.
As a result of that, there are over 15,000 dismantled nuclear warheads waiting to be disposed of.
It makes Shadow Moses feel less like an isolated crisis and more like a symptom of a bigger issue. Snake is walking through one facility, Nastasha is describing a whole world of them. A world where weapons can be dismantled but not truly removed. Where storage becomes policy and disposal becomes delay. The thing everyone calls peace still has to be stacked somewhere in the dark. Nastasha's most poignant moment comes a little later though, when she talks about why nuclear elimination matters to her, why it's personal.
Seems like you're pretty focused on that issue.
Victims of nuclear radiation are a sad thing to see, and I have seen a lot of it. I have seen more than enough of it. I was born and raised in Pripyat, Ukraine. I was 10 years old on that day, April 26, 1986.
You don't mean...
Yes, Chernobyl. That is the day that changed my life and thousands of other lives. I live just 3 kilometers north of there.
Up until that point, Nastasha could sound like the game's nuclear encyclopedia. Useful, intelligent, even a little distant. But Nastasha's link to Chernobyl gives the facts something heavier, which you carry around with you.
My parents, and many others like them who helped in the cleanup, died a few years later from radiation sickness. We must rid this world of all nuclear weapons before they cause more misery, before they destroy the delicate environment that keeps us alive. I will not allow this pain and anxiety to pass on to yet another generation.
It turns all the earlier calls into something different. When Nastasha talks about nuclear weapons, storage sites, and material going missing, it's useful context, sure, but in reality, she's speaking from a more personal place. From a life shaped by failed systems, and shows how ordinary people are left to absorb the damage. That's why she's so important. Metal Gear Solid 1 doesn't force every player to hear this, but allows every player the ability to find it if they're curious enough. You have to keep calling, and asking, and listening. And if you do, the voice from Los Angeles becomes less distant, and her expertise becomes the result of a person with a story and motivation. And suddenly, the optional codec calls aren't so optional anymore. Sure, you can finish the game without them, but you understand less of the game as a result. Because Nastasha turns Shadow Moses from a mission location into evidence, into trauma, into repercussions. Proof of a world that's merely pretending the nuclear age has gone, when in reality, it's merely tucking it away. While Nastasha gets Snake thinking, this is the polar opposite to what Campbell wants to do. Campbell often acts as a guide for the player. After all, he's Snake's direct line of command, so it makes sense that despite his personal history with Snake, he's always redirecting Snake to his mission.
First, go to the elevator in the back, take it up to the ground floor, then look for the DARPA chief.
That's Campbell in his purest form, because Campbell's role is to keep the mission moving.
Snake, your mission is to infiltrate, not to fight. Don't let the enemy see you. First, you've got to rescue the DARPA chief. Infiltrate the building in front. Look for some way to get in.
That line is advice for the player, but also advice for Snake, since fighting would only slow him down. But it tells us something about Campbell's voice in the codec. He constantly pulls Snake back from curiosity, emotion, and confusion into duty. Infiltrate. Rescue the chief. Find Baker. Contact Merrill. Stop Metal Gear. Campbell doesn't want Shadow Moses interpreted. He wants the mission finished. Despite their history together, and the occasional joke about hiding in a cardboard box.
What have you got there? A cardboard box?
Yeah, remember that trick?
That's the Snake I remember. Those poor fools won't know what hit them.
Campbell is deeply manipulative. Even getting Snake on this mission was calculating, and he used his knowledge of Snake to do what he thought was right. One of the most missed pieces of conversation happens inside a secret briefing tape labeled the Iditarod. And secret really does mean secret. To view it, you have to exit the briefing menu once the initial tape ends without watching any of the others. If you don't, you miss it until the menu resets. It's buried deep, and what it reveals about Campbell is uncomfortable. In this tape, Snake doesn't want the mission. He wants to go back to Twin Lakes. There's a dog sled race in Anchorage, and he says his 50 Huskies are his only family.
Right now, my 50 Huskies are my only family. I've got to take care of them.
For a character like Snake, it's a hard-hitting line, because it isn't tactical or legendary, as his reputation suggests. It isn't the voice of a man who destroyed Outer Heaven, but a lonely person saying, "I have something to go back to." And Campbell shuts the door.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry, Snake, but this vessel is headed for the Bering Sea. There's no room for debate.
Snake calls it what it is.
Snake, there's enough dirt in your file from your days as an agent to keep you in the stockade until you're a very old man.
Oh, I see. Blackmail.
No, Snake. I prefer to look at it as helping you come to a decision more easily.
This is revealing. Campbell doesn't just order Snake back into the field, he pressures him under the guise of guidance. He knows Snake's past and his guilt and isolation, perhaps even part of him that might still believe that the battlefield is the only place he really belongs. Then he goes for the jugular.
You're a natural-born soldier. You're not the grow old gracefully type. It's the same for all of us who've seen real action. The only place we can feel truly alive is on the battlefield. I'm a soldier too. I know those feelings of powerlessness, frustration that you feel every day. You've tried to play the Boy Scout out there in Alaska, but you can't race dogs in the snow forever. Why don't you come back to us and be a soldier again?
It's brutal because it turns Snake's civilian life into a costume he's simply trying on, not one he can adopt. The dogs, the snow, the race, the quiet. Campbell makes all of it sound temporary, almost childish, as though Snake isn't really living in Alaska, but hiding there until someone gives him permission to become a soldier again. And this is where Campbell becomes the opposite of Nastasha. Nastasha uses optional calls to make Snape stop and think. Campbell uses optional calls to make sure Snake can't stop. Even much later, when Snake starts asking the right questions, Campbell pulls him back to the mission. On the cargo elevator, Snake asks why the White House is being so inflexible. Then he asks if Campbell is still hiding something from him. Campbell doesn't answer.
But they're threatening to launch a nuclear weapon.
They've made their final decision.
Why is the White House being so inflexible? Colonel, is there still something you're hiding from me?
Snake, please, just concentrate on stopping them, okay?
It hints at concern, but also containment. Campbell doesn't expand the truth the way Nastasha does. He keeps it boxed inside the mission. He needs Snake alive, moving, useful, and focused to keep going even when the truth threatens to spill over. But the important thing is that Campbell isn't doing this from a position of total control. That's what the Houseman conversation reveals later. By the end of the game, after Metal Gear is destroyed, the Secretary of Defense decides to bomb Shadow Moses and erase the evidence. Campbell tells Snake that B-2 bombers have been launched, carrying tactical nuclear bombs. The official goal is no longer to stop Metal Gear, it's to cover up what happened there.
Now that there's no more danger of a nuclear strike from Metal Gear, he's going to do whatever's necessary to cover up the truth of what really happened here.
While Campbell was playing Snake, he was being played too. He admits that Meryl wasn't just unlucky, she was transferred to Shadow Moses to control him.
Meryl was transferred to this base just before the terrorist attack as a way of manipulating me.
The same way Campbell uses Snake's guilt, history, and battlefield identity to drag him back into Shadow Moses, the people above Campbell used Meryl to drag him into cooperation.
I'm sorry. They forced me to cooperate in exchange for her life.
It gives new clarity to the Iditarod tape. It doesn't excuse the blackmail, but it does make it a little more tragic all round. Campbell isn't just the voice of the cold machine, he's a prisoner of it too. He pressures Snake because he's under pressure himself. He lies because he's been cornered by bigger lies. And when the system no longer needs him, Houseman discards him just as they would Snake.
Roy Campbell has been relieved of duty.
Houseman even twists the knife by saying Campbell,
He truly believed that he was in command of this operation.
it's cruel, but explains a new layer to us. Campbell sounded like command because that's the role he was given, but the real power was above him, a colder, darker power. So Campbell's calls on subsequent playthroughs become a little sadder because they reveal how compromised he is. He cares about Snake, he cares about Meryl. Those two facts aren't independent of one another. He knows he's lying, but keeps giving orders anyway. That's why his voice works so well against Nastasha's. Nastasha tells Snake to look at the consequences. Campbell tells him to keep moving through them. And by the time Houseman attempts to take over, we understand why. Another voice that changes on subsequent playthroughs is Master Miller. Miller's voice isn't nuclear theory or blackmail or direct orders. He sounds warmer and looser. He comes across as someone who's already seen the worst of the world and decided the most useful thing he can offer is practical advice. And that's how he is for the player, a knowledge base for survival and useful tips. How to walk, rest or handle the cold. How to think when you're behind enemy lines and everything around you is trying to kill you.
Snake, you've got to think. Your mind is your most dangerous weapon. If things are getting too complicated, try to simplify your thoughts.
He's telling Snake to think clearly. Sleep when you can. Control your body. Don't lose your head. Listen to the danger before it arrives. But Metal Gear Solid 1 likes to blur the line between Snake and the player.
There's a big difference between real soldiers and those kids who have only been trained in VR simulators. After playing for a long time, you should get some rest too.
Miller is talking about real soldiers, forged by actual battle, versus people trained in simulated environments. But we're the one in the simulated environment. We're the one learning Shadow Moses through patterns, resets, radar cones, guard routes, and boss attempts. Miller says there's a difference between real soldiers and VR soldiers, while sitting inside a video game, teaching us how to behave like one. That's Metal Gear Solid in a nutshell. Sincere, ridiculous, self-aware, and more interesting because it refuses to separate those things. Then, sometimes, Miller just becomes your weird survival uncle.
It's also important to be able to control your bodily functions. You never know when a long demo is about to begin. So make sure you're prepared to sit in front of the monitor for a long time if necessary.
That one is funny because it's obviously a joke about Metal Gear itself. Make sure you've controlled your bodily functions because a long demo might begin. And honestly, that's fair. This game deserves a long playthrough after all. But even the joke fits the pattern. Miller's optional calls keep collapsing Snake's survival into the player's behavior. Sleep properly. Don't play tired. Don't fight on a full stomach. Be ready for a long cutscene. Snake is sneaking through a nuclear facility, and you're sitting in front of a screen. And yet, Miller somehow talks to both of you without changing his tone. Later, he makes it almost explicit.
People who have been through war and survived develop a kind of sixth sense to warn them of danger. Trust your instincts as a soldier, as a gamer.
That little pause between the words is Miller starting with Snake, then turning to us. And for a second, it feels like the game is looking directly through the screen at us. Not in an obvious Psycho Mantis way, where clever tricks with vibrations and memory cards can freak us out momentarily. It's deeper than that. It's instincts we're building as players, which are not entirely separate from Snake's instincts as a soldier.
That inner voice that warns you when danger is nearby. You can't learn that in training. You've got to have survived a few firefights, seen a few friends blown away, before you learn that trick.
Miller says the inner voice doesn't come from training. It comes from surviving firefights and seeing friends blown away. Real danger. The "as a gamer" line transforms from something funny into something a little more critical. Because the player gets better by trying again. We learn through failure without carrying the wounds of those failures. We get to press continue. Snake's instinct comes from somewhere else. Memories and bodies, all things he survived but hasn't really escaped. And later, Liquid turns that discomfort into an accusation. After Rex falls, he doesn't just call Snake a pawn, he tells him why he thinks Snake kept going.
Why did you come here? Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing. That's why.
What?
Are you denying it? Haven't you already killed most of my comrades?
That was...
I watched your face when you did it. It was filled with the joy of battle.
You're wrong.
There's a killer inside you.
It's a hard-hitting line because, as Miller, he's already blurred soldier instinct and player instinct. He tells Snake to trust that inner voice. He tells him to trust himself, as a soldier, as a gamer. Then Liquid poisons that idea. Maybe the thing that makes Snake effective is also the thing that he doesn't want to face. And uncomfortably, the player is caught in that too, because we are playing. We are learning the patterns. We are enjoying the mastery. We are getting better at sneaking, shooting, choking. Liquid's accusation is aimed at Snake, but it brushes past the screen on the way there. Miller's optional calls are effective as advice, but they work more distinctly as a mirror. And on a first playthrough, that's already interesting enough. But on a second playthrough, Miller's voice becomes stranger, because it isn't Miller at all. The real Master Miller has been dead for days. The person giving Snake this advice, the person teaching him to trust his instincts and simplify his thoughts to survive, is Liquid Snake in disguise. Campbell eventually reveals that Miller's body was found at home, and Liquid drops the mask completely. All those calls, relying on the Master's wisdom, become a little darker. And not because Liquid is secretly giving bad advice. He's not. That's what makes it worse. Liquid doesn't manipulate Snake by sounding evil and tricking him. He manipulates him by sounding familiar. The survival tips are real. The warmth is fake. The trust is borrowed from a dead man. So when Miller tells Snake, "Your mind is your most dangerous weapon," that line comes back differently, because Snake's mind is exactly what Liquid has been working on. And that brings us back to my point. The optional codec calls aren't just side conversations. They're where Metal Gear Solid 1 lets the themes take a hold. Miller shows how a soldier is trained to survive, and how easily that training can be turned into another form of control. Because sometimes, the most dangerous voice in your head isn't the one giving bad advice. It's the one giving good advice for the wrong reason. If Nastasha, Campbell, and Miller dictate the terms of Snake's mission, then the calls that look the least important are the ones that protect his humanity. Codec calls give us a unique way of saving the game, with an in-world explanation, but when you save, you probably didn't just hit save and turn off the power, because you'd be missing out on an underappreciated character amongst the cast, Mei Ling. Despite being technically gifted and part of the mission on that basis, Mei Ling provides the player with some of the more interestingly genuine lines. Technically, you could spend the whole game without saving, and therefore, many of her lines would be optional. Her lines come from a more sincere place though, and during the escape route, near the end of the game, she tells Snake,
This will probably be your last save.
I'm going to miss those proverbs of yours.
Snake, please, be safe for me.
It's a touching moment, and perhaps one that the player would mirror. But Snake's request to make a hard copy of all the codec conversations is preservation of all that has been said and happened, one that the government would prefer not to exist. But Mei Ling isn't a soldier, and her voice is not only proverbs, but also a human reaction outside of soldier mentality. When Snake leaves Meryl at the mercy of Sniper Wolf, she says,
She'll die if you leave her like that. Aren't you going to save her?
She's just bait. It's me they want. If I step out there, I'm gonna get picked off, and who's gonna save Meryl then? I'm hoping that as long as I don't fall for it, they'll leave Meryl alive.
So you're just going to leave Meryl there? She's hurt.
I know what I'm doing. Meryl understands too.
That's horrible.
You're right, it is horrible, but that's war, and the first rule of war is to stay alive.
It drags us into Snake's mind, but also to how unreasonably cruel that mindset can sound from the outside. As a player, the life bar must not reach zero. But in context, there's more to it than that. Mei Ling's reaction is natural, and not one immediately obvious to us as we flee away, leaving Meryl there. It's tactically sound, but it's inhumane. While Mei Ling acts as Snake's conscience, Naomi acts as his clinical analyst. Naomi's optional calls are often funny because she has this habit of turning Snake into a medical case while he's trying to be cool.
Are you smoking?
Yeah, so what?
Didn't you know that cigarettes contain benzopyrene, a chemical that leads to lung cancer? We now know that when benzopyrene enters the body, it changes to benzopyrene diolipoxide, BPDE. and attaches to the receptors on the p53 gene, the gene which causes lung cancer. The BPDE attaches to the p53 gene in 3 specific locations and causes precancerous changes to the lung tissue.
You know a lot about science, but you don't know how good a cigarette tastes in the morning.
It's a little ridiculous, but it tells us about Naomi's habit to dive into the science, while Snake smokes because he likes it, perhaps even because it gives him a small comfort while he's facing more immediate threats. Another amusing call is when Snake is caught killing rats after the sniper wolf fight.
Snake, is killing rats really that fun? Torturing small animals is a sign of a warped mind, you know.
It feels like the game catching the player doing something pointless and slightly cruel. But instead of Mei-Ling's human reaction, Naomi reacts like a scientist and immediately diagnoses it. It almost feels like the game, or Naomi, is diagnosing us, the player. Snake's body, habits, and behavior all become readable around Naomi. A cigarette is a warning. A pointless act of violence is a symptom. Soon after this, once Snake is bored of harming rats, if Snake harms the dogs in the cave, Otacon will plead with him.
Snake, don't kill the dogs, please! What are you talking about? If I don't kill them, they'll kill me.
But those dogs are just innocent animals.
If they were guilty, it'd be okay.
But you keep dogs, don't you?
So what? This is war. My private hobbies have got nothing to do with it.
This echoes the Iditarod tape. Earlier, Snake's huskies represented the life he wanted to return to. Here, Otacon accidentally pulls that private life into the mission. Snake rejects the connection immediately. Otacon sees the human contradiction that Snake tries to bury. He sees that Snake is not just a soldier. There's a person underneath who keeps dogs and cares about animals, and yet still has to survive a war zone. Otacon is a scientist, like Naomi, but less emotionally detached. He fails to separate his emotions to what is necessary. He struggles with this immensely when Snake fights Sniper Wolf.
What is it?
Wolf, I just forget it.
It's a small line, but it shows how Otacon starts to say something and yet can't. That hesitation is the point. The codec gives him space to speak, but not the strength to finish. His inability to control his emotions isn't weakness. It's a sign that he is neither experienced nor a soldier. And that's what makes these calls so fascinating. They're optional. You don't need to hear Nastasha talk about Chernobyl. You don't need to find the Iditarod tape. You don't need Miller's survival lectures, Mei-Ling's final save or proverbs, Naomi diagnosing Snake's habits, or Otacon asking him not to kill the dogs. The mission continues without them. The game still plays out. Metal Gear still falls. But something is missing, because the optional codec calls are where Metal Gear Solid lets the pressure leak out. Sometimes through a nuclear lecture or a joke about smoking. Sometimes it's a lonely man talking about his dogs, or a scientist turning behavior into a diagnosis, or someone just on the other end of the line who sounds scared, tired, helpless, or human. They're a vital part of the game because they give it context and texture, thought and consequence. And the game doesn't force any of it on you. It waits for you to stop moving, to open the codec, to ask. Metal Gear Solid's main story is already remembered for its twists, speeches, betrayals, an impossible PlayStation 1 melodrama. But some of its most revealing writing is hidden in the moments where the player could have just simply kept moving on towards the next objective. The more time you give to these calls, the more it gives back. That's why the codec calls still feel so powerful decades later. It's more than the soundbite or the portraits, more than the frequency numbers or the green glow of the screen. It's the feeling that somewhere inside all of that military noise, someone was trying to tell you the truth. You just had to call back.